George Cooper Sr. spent 7 seasons of young Sheldon being treated like slightly exhausted furniture of the Cooper household, the dependable dad who basically exists to react to other people's chaos. And then Big Bang Theory told us he was a lazy drunk who cheated on his wife. And here's where it gets me, because we watched both shows. We were there, we saw who this man actually was. And the gap between the George Cooper who raised Sheldon in Medford, Texas, and the George Cooper that Mary described to everyone in Pasadena is so enormous, so structurally impossible to explain away, that once you start pulling on that thread, the whole picture unravels. Today we're going deep on George Cooper Sr., the man the show wants you to see as background noise. The man Mary Cooper turned into a villain after he died and couldn't defend himself. And the man who, if you actually pay attention, might be the most genuinely tragic figure in this entire franchise. Not Georgie, not Missy, George. And I want to start with the thing that broke me open on a rewatch, because once I understood this one piece, everything else landed completely differently. George Cooper had a dream, a real one, not a vague wish, not a fantasy he talked about over beers, an actual concrete offer from a respected program. Tulsa, a head coaching position, the kind of opportunity that a high school football coach in a small Texas town spends his entire career hoping for. He was good enough to get it. That matters. Someone looked at George Cooper and said, "You're the guy we want. That's something." And he turned it down, not because he didn't want it, not because he thought something better was coming. He turned it down because Mary didn't want to leave Medford. And the way she handled it, the way she weaponized his love for his family against his own ambitions, the way she framed staying as the godly choice and leaving as selfishness, that is some of the most quietly devastating writing in the entire show. Because George knew exactly what was happening, and he let it happen anyway. He swallowed the dream whole, and he never mentioned it again. He just went back to coaching Medford football and being the man his family needed him to be. That's not a weakness. That's the specific kind of sacrifice that never gets thanked, because the person it protects never fully understands what was given up. Now here's the thing about the Brenda Sparks situation, because this one gets misread constantly, and I want to clear it up. George got close to his neighbor. He spent time with her. They had real conversations. There was clearly something there, a warmth, a comfort, the kind of connection you develop when someone actually listens to you, without immediately redirecting to what Sheldon needs, or what the church thinks. And yes, it made Mary furious. Yes, it was a line he was approaching. But he didn't cross it. He pulled back. He recognized what was happening, and he stepped away from it. And the show is pretty clear about this. George Cooper did not cheat on his wife. He thought about it in the way that any human being trapped in a marriage where they feel unseen and unnecessary might think about it. And then he chose his family. Again. The same way he chose his family over Tulsa. The same way he chose his family every single time something in him needed more than what that house could give him. But Mary Cooper, after he died, turned those almost moments into facts. She told Sheldon. She told her friends. She repeated it so many times it became the official record. George cheated. George was a drunk. George was a disappointment. And because George was dead, there was nobody to say, "Actually, that's not what happened." That is not grief. That is historical revision at the expense of a man who can no longer speak. But, okay. Let me get to the part that nobody talks about enough, because the Tulsa story and the Brenda Sparks story are painful, but this next thing is where it gets truly heavy. George Cooper was raising Sheldon Cooper. I want you to actually think about what that sentence means. Not just the cute version, where a lovable dad doesn't understand his genius kid. The real version. A man with no training, no framework, no language for what he was dealing with, trying to parent a child whose brain operated in a way that nobody. In 1989, Medford, Texas had any tools to understand. The germophobia, the rituals, The inability to tolerate certain textures, sounds, or social situations. The meltdowns. The complete social isolation. The constant cruelty to other children not out of malice, but out of a neurological inability to understand that other people's feelings exist. George didn't get a diagnosis. He didn't get a support group. He didn't get a therapist who sat him down and said, "Here's what's happening with your son, and here's how to help him." He just got Sheldon every single day. And he showed up. There's a scene that I genuinely think is the most underrated moment in the entire run of Young Sheldon. George and Sheldon are alone and something has gone wrong, as it always does. And instead of losing his patience, instead of doing what any exhausted man at the end of his rope might do, George just sits with him. He doesn't fix it. He doesn't lecture. He doesn't make it about himself. He just stays. And Sheldon, who cannot receive love in any conventional form, receives it anyway because his dad is still there. Sheldon never understood that. Sheldon couldn't. That's not an insult, it's just the truth. He experienced his father the way he experienced everything, through his own needs, his own discomfort, his own framework. And what he registered was a man who didn't understand him, who wasn't smart enough to keep up with him, who watched football instead of reading physics. What he missed was the man who stayed anyway. Now Mary gets a lot of attention for her sacrifices, and she made real ones. But there's something the show quietly documents about George that almost nobody acknowledges. Mary had the church, she had Pastor Jeff, she had Connie. She had an entire community built around her identity as a devout Southern Baptist mother. When things got hard, Mary had somewhere to put it. George had nothing. He had his beer and his couch and whatever game was on. He had Medford High football during the season. He had Brenda Sparks next door when things got desperate enough that he needed someone to actually see him. His emotional support system was essentially a television set, and one neighboring relationship that nearly blew up his marriage. For a man who was quietly holding an enormous amount of weight, that is a devastating lack of infrastructure. And here's what made it worse. He knew he wasn't Mary's first choice. That's not a theory. The show tells us directly that Mary had a previous relationship before George, that there was a version of her life where George Cooper wasn't the plan. And I don't think George ever fully stopped knowing that. I think that information lived somewhere quiet in him, and it shaped the way he moved through that marriage, always slightly aware that his presence was conditional in ways that Mary's wasn't. So what did he do with that? He coached football. He drove his kids to things. He made pancakes. He sat at the end of Sheldon's bed when Sheldon couldn't sleep. He absorbed Mary's frustration when it came and redirected it with a joke or a sigh and waited for the storm to pass. He was the pressure valve for a household that generated more pressure than most families ever have to deal with. And then one morning, he said, "See y'all later." That's it. That was the goodbye. See y'all later. He walked out the door like it was any other day, because it was any other day. He didn't know. Nobody knew. And a few hours later, he was gone. Heart attack at work. No warning. No final conversation. No chance for anyone to say the things they should have been saying for years. George Cooper died carrying everything he never got to put down. He died with Tulsa still in him. He died having never heard Mary say, "I see what you gave up and I'm grateful." He died with Sheldon 1,000 miles away, already absorbed into the life that George's quiet labor had helped make possible. He died with Georgie at 17 left behind to do what he himself had always done. Just hold it together and don't ask for credit. And then the rewriting started. This is the part that I cannot get past no matter how many times I think about it. Mary built a whole new George after he died. A worse one that justified her grief by making the loss smaller. Because if George was a cheater, if he was a drunk, if he was a disappointment, then losing him doesn't have to be the bottomless hole it actually was. You can grieve a bad husband differently than you grieve a good. The guilt is easier to carry if the person you failed was already failing you, she told Sheldon. Sheldon believed her because he always believed her. and because his own memories of his father had always been filtered through his own limitations anyway. And so in Pasadena, year after year, the story calcified. George Cooper became the cautionary tale, the lazy patriarch, the guy who cheated, the man Mary endured. The show we watched told a different story. The man we watched was not perfect. He was tired and sometimes selfish and too quick to reach for the beer and not quick enough to reach for the hard conversation. But he loved his family with the specific kind of love that doesn't announce itself. The kind that shows up in the driveway at the right time. The kind that sits on the edge of a bed in the dark. The kind that swallows a dream in Tulsa without making anyone feel guilty for it. Here's what I want you to sit with. Sheldon Cooper stood at a podium in Stockholm and won the Nobel Prize in physics. He thanked people. He said beautiful things. And somewhere in that speech is the debt he owes to a man he spent decades misunderstanding. A man whose death shaped every person in that family in ways none of them have fully reckoned with. A man who said, "See y'all later," one ordinary morning and never came back. George Cooper didn't get a redemption arc. He didn't get a scene where someone finally said thank you. He didn't get to watch his kid win anything. He didn't get Tulsa. He didn't get the version of his life where someone looked at him the way he deserved to be looked at and said, "You are enough. You have always been enough." He got a beer and a couch and a house full of people who needed him and didn't know it. And the cruelest joke of all is that Mary's version of him is the one that survived. The drunk, the cheater, the disappointment. That's the George Cooper most of the audience met first, in Pasadena, through her words. This one right here is the George Cooper who actually existed. And now that you've seen him, I don't think you can watch either show the same way again.